I think it's certainly true that the local government sector as a whole received one of the worst settlements from the Comprehensive Spending Review. You could argue that that's because councils are one of the biggest spenders of government money. If you include things like school spending, councils go through about £180 billion of spending a year, which is over a quarter of total public spending. So it's obvious that when you're having to make significant cuts, that councils were going to have to bear quite a lot of responsibility for that. I think there is justifiable anger around the fact that cuts have been front-loaded and therefore councils haven't been allowed to spread the cuts over a longer period of time. That councils' hands are tied in terms of revenue raising. They really have had very few options in terms of raising additional revenue to try and mitigate the cuts, which has meant the only thing they can really do is cut services. And I think there's a feeling from the sector that perhaps Eric Pickles and his ministerial team could have done a little bit more batting on behalf of the sector with the Treasury to try and get a bit of a better deal rather than what looked like about a 28% cut overall. I think Eric Pickles has always been a combative politician, and he is somebody who will not hide his views and will always be very honest with the sector. I do feel that he needs to row back from quite a scattergun approach to commenting on the sector. He seems to have an opinion on everything that the sector does, and I think some of that has smacked of a little bit of micromanagement. He's absolutely right as Secretary of State to focus on what local authorities do well and what sometimes they don't do so well, and to offer advice on how they could do things better. But I think just in terms of a relationship with the sector, he should perhaps praise it a bit more and perhaps protect its reputation within the cabinet a little bit more, but also concentrate on the 2 or 3 things that he really wants to improve within the sector, work constructively with it, and perhaps do a little bit less of hectoring within the media. The finance review is the last piece of the government's sort of localism jigsaw, if you like. They've talked a lot about giving citizens and councils greater powers, but not so much about giving them financial freedoms. Now, it might be that as part of the finance review that this free councils model is one of the options that they put forward. I think there are really great difficulties around working out what you do with the business rates, and previous governments have obviously looked at this, as has Michael Lyons in his review. Of course, the main problem being that there are some councils who would gain quite considerably through the relocalisation of rates, and some who would do very badly. And how do you support poorer areas who might not have the large businesses paying large amounts of business rates, and ensure that they are not penalised by any system? But I think the free councils model is certainly in line with a lot of certainly Conservative Party policy at the moment. They've obviously talked about free schools, about freeing up other state institutions from Whitehall control. So I suspect there will be quite a lot of support for the idea from the Conservative benches, and it also links in with the Lib Dem agenda to give councils additional control over their funding. So it certainly will be on the agenda, I'm sure, but the devil, as always, is in the detail. I think Francis Maud has come up with some really interesting ideas around the mutual model for council services and indeed public services in general. There is a question about whether there is the interest and indeed capacity within the sector, particularly at a time when they're battling with significant budget cuts. But it's certainly a model that I think councils should look at. We should remember that in the past councils have delivered lots of services that we perhaps today think are only delivered by the private sector. Councils in the past have delivered everything from local mortgages and personal finance to MOT centres. I think there's going to be an interesting debate between the different sort of ideological sides of the Conservative Party about to what extent councils should be involved in what they would see as distorting the market. But it's certainly an opportunity for quite forward-looking aspirational councils to look at, certainly in terms also of raising more revenue.